It's the Wilk Report. I'm Michael Wilk, coming to you from Cleveland, Ohio, and joining me after a long, long time is Larry Bernard. Welcome back, Larry. How are you?
It's great to be back, and it's great that we've been able to actually sync our schedules, and individual personal chaos has been drastically reduced.
Yeah, it's been really crazy, and also because my job has got me like working really weird schedules. Um, but yeah, thing that's been in the news lately are Terminator and Star Wars franchises and the major troubles that they've been experiencing, especially with their latest trailers. Uh, but the first story I wanted to cover actually has to do with the Terminator Dark Fate, because a lot of the trailers that have been dropping really have confirmed what was leaked earlier this summer with regards to the plot. And now
Well, I
projections
mean,
on both Screen Rant and Forbes are predicting that it's probably going to have a soft opening
mhm.
weekend. Well, basically, it's not going to do all that well.
Let's face it. The only thing innovative and new you could do would be to go to what the Terminator Sarah Connor Chronicles did, but then you'd have to get the rights out of that IP holders, and they're probably not wanting to sell those rights back for their ideas.
Right, and
Do
Cameron
you
is
remember? Do you
producer and
remember?
co-writer. He's doing a reboot of the franchise.
Well, here's the thing about that, though. Cameron actually signed a license right back to allow them to do this movie. So this isn't really James Cameron producing it. He's producing it on paper because the rights are his, but he has too much other stuff to do and he can't get to a Terminator movie.
Right, because he's doing
But
the Avatar sequel. He's trying to get an Alita sequel off the ground, although that's got a few complications to it that I've covered in other videos.
yeah,
But DVD and physical media sales, I think, are kind of
they're
helping it out. So
yeah they're good enough that you can make the argument to Disney because it would be Disney who'd be releasing it at this point of like saying, hey, the live action anime thing, it's almost hit. This didn't have the right time on the calendar, didn't have good promotion, so we can make this work.
right, and I think part of the another part of the problem is uh, that they've been doing that they've been trying to cram like an entire franchise into the first movie and then wondering what the hell goes on, if it doesn't do well enough. And it's like, dude, just tell a standalone story, and then, when it does well, then you can think about doing the next movie. Basically, the way the original Star Wars trilogy worked. But
Yeah, but for the Terminator, you remember the Sarah Connor Chronicles?
vaguely, I only saw a handful of episodes. I never really got into it.
The interesting narrative conceit they had was the battle with Skynet, the actual war in the future, wasn't the actual battle in the actual war. John Connor and Skynet both sent temporal agents to different points in time, and they were both playing a chess game with each other through time.
Right, it's right, and it kind of always struck me as being like this time war, kind of like in Doctor Who, where you see where each is going back and undoing whatever the other does, and it becomes a tit for tat that starts wearing on the timeline. But there was this Doctor
That's
Who
really,
serial with Sylvester McCoy back in the '80s called Silver Nemesis, and it showed like this chess game being played throughout time between
yeah.
the Doctor and his unseen adversary, who turned
And
out to
that
be
was part of the Cartmel master plan at one point,
right.
too, if I remember.
Right, but this kind of brings us back to the present day, where uh, both Screen Rant and Forbes are predicting that there's going to be a soft opening at the box office. Now, Screen Rant people, have a so-so relationship with it as far as giving it any credibility. Forbes, not so much, but these are both
Who's the
sources that
Forbes
are,
writer? Is it Scott Mendelson?
yeah,
So Scott, I like Scott, and he knows his own reputation. He's viewed as a shill for a reason.
right. Right, but every once in a while he
He
does,
breaks out.
yeah, and I think this is one of those things. Not because he's necessarily right, but because he just happens to be jumping on board with what's already on the wall.
Or he realizes that there's no way I can carry this bucket of water for you guys. You're on your own.
Right, basically, right, because especially with the leaks that have come out, they've been on Reddit for a while. In fact, I've got the link up on my screen right now. But let's go ahead and read some stuff from Screen Rant here. Terminator Dark Fate. This is from September 9th by Sandy Schaefer. That says Terminator Dark Fate is projected for a relatively soft opening at the United States box office in November. The Terminator franchise has certainly come a long way since James Cameron's original film hit theaters in 1984. Essentially a slasher film with a sci-fi twist. Well, it was a lot more than that. It was actually kind of like this Oedipal drama. Because if you remember your high school drama Oedipus Rex,
Yep.
where there's this prophecy of a man who's destined to murder his father and marry his mother and have kids with her. And everyone is trying to, including Oedipus himself, everyone is trying to avert this horrible destiny, and their actions simply make it come true. And that's actually what the Terminator is on a $6.4 million budget with, blending science fiction and action and horror and romance and all this other stuff. But that's essentially what it is.
Or as James Cameron said to Roger Corman, it's what we always tried to do, but this time I had money.
Right. And even then it was still kind of a relatively low price tag because, 1984, you're looking, average, for a film like that would go like maybe $10, $20 million, and he did it for just over $6 million. But but then it did well. It launched his career as a director. It let him do Aliens and The Abyss and Terminator 2 Judgment Day and all that other stuff. But it, Judgment Day, made over $500 million at the box office. The sequels,
the sequels never really had a good idea.
No, because they're trying to rehash the first two movies, and they just... oh my God.
Terminator 3 was an interesting coda for the series, but 4 was completely lost. Genesis was a terrible attempt to do a reboot by taking the unseen protagonist of the movies, the protagonist in waiting, and destroying him. And they plan to destroy him in Terminator Dark Fate, assuming the leaks are accurate, which, based on all the information we have strong reason to believe that they're accurate.
Right, because so far, all the trailers that we've seen throughout all this, they have basically conformed to everything we have seen that has been predicted by the Reddit leaks. I mean, literally everything.
So I expect John Connor to be killed in like the first 30 minutes of the movie, like the leak said.
Right.
At this point.
Right. And it, plus we've also seen, again, we've seen, because I've got a Cracked article up now that says, and it's from 2015, but it's still
prescient.
Yeah, because it goes into like these 6 reasons why Hollywood movies suck and why it's like we don't need elaborate origin stories anymore. And then there's also this thing where, let's scroll down here. No one wants to watch a movie with millions of villains packed into it, which Genesis suffered from. You had you had the T-1000, you had the T-800, you had Skynet, played by Matt Smith,
which was a giant waste.
Right,
which was a giant waste of Matt Smith's talent.
Right, and then John Connor himself as a corrupted John Connor who is basically assimilated by Skynet. So, it was just a mess. And plus it was PG-13 rated.
Yeah.
They're trying, right. And
they reset the timeline so this time John Connor will be a girl.
Right, and then there's another thing, and I think Alita Battle Angel actually had this problem also, as movies need to stop assuming that they're getting sequels, and that's a major problem that because the movie could have done a lot better if it had just been a standalone film, but again, they're trying to set up a franchise before the foundation's even been laid.
Also, they tried to alter the Terminator timeline, which is already wrecked through bootstrap temporal paradoxes
Right.
and you're adding in yet another bootstrap temporal paradox, and it makes it very, very difficult for you to functionally maintain disbelief.
Right.
Which,
And right. And
which
then
is why the Sarah Connor Chronicles had the only way forward for this as a technical premise. Of course, there are all these paradoxes because there's a time war going on.
right. And right. And so each one, and so you're, is dealing with different timelines, but uh, but then there's a problem of knowing who your audience is, because Genesis was PG-13. All
Which was
right.
a mistake.
Right. The original Terminator was rated R.
And that was back in the 80s when a rated R actually meant something.
Exactly. Because it had like F bombs, it had, plenty of gore. Well, gore for the time, it was plenty. Today, it's kind of like,
Also,
yeah,
also steamy sex scenes in bad lighting.
yeah, yeah, because it's actually more of a guerrilla production, and you're actually shooting on location a lot of the times. But so again, and a lot of what's in the Cracked article, I mean, you can tell this was written by someone who actually, like me, went to film school and knows what the hell is being talked about, because there's this tendency right now for nostalgia pushing. In fact, writer Sean Carlin, who used to be a screenwriter and then he transitioned to writing novels, but he had this thing where uh, he dubs it the nostalgia industrial complex,
Mm.
meaning that Hollywood has been pandering to Gen Xers for a while now, because we've got reboots or sequels to Star Wars, Super Friends, Karate Kid, Ghostbusters, Lethal Weapon, Halloween,
And now
Bill
we're
Ted.
rolling into the hashtag 90s kids for their
Right,
nostalgia.
right. And, but ironically though, out of all these examples that we've listed, Karate Kid seems to be the only nostalgia pushing that's worked so far. Because if you
But
think
it's
about it,
also,
Cobra
but
Kai
really,
on
really is Cobra Kai nostalgia pushing? It's telling you another story in that universe, but it's not really an appeal to nostalgia.
right. Well, to a degree it is, but I think it's nostalgia pushing done right. It's when you're
Yeah,
taking something that's been done before, but you're telling it in a new, different way. This time you're telling it from the other guy's perspective, not necessarily through Kreese's perspective. It's more through Johnny
right.
Lawrence's, and Johnny Lawrence actually he starts off as the underdog, which I think was a good idea because people still
Mm.
love to root for the underdog. That's another reason why Ray, or Ma Ray Sue, as some people call her, people can't relate to her because she's not an underdog. She comes
No,
across as perfect and it kind of talks down to and condescends to the audience, where as Johnny Lawrence, he's the underdog and he has to climb back up from this pit, and that's another reason why we sympathize with Sarah Connor in the original Terminator film, because she is someone who's caught up in events beyond her understanding, beyond her control, and she has to actually find reserves of strength that she didn't even know she had, but she
but
has to find them, and
but
therefore in the
now,
sequel, and then in the
but
immediate sequel, she has to. She's back in the pit. She's in a mental institution, and she has to climb back out of that and find a way to keep her humanity.
and
People
also
relate to
redeem
that,
her relationship with her son.
right? And people relate to that. It comes across as believable, realistic in a way that ordinarily wouldn't be. So
And this Terminator, it's about an illegal alien who gets saved by two white saviors, one of whom's a robot. That's what our movie's about now.
right, well, augmented human apparently, and not
Augmented
necessarily.
human, but still, you have two white savior figures. Technically, three if Dutch does anything other than be a glorified cameo in this movie.
Right, right, and
The if you're going to be a woke movie, why are you doing this? That you don't even know what you're doing about being a woke movie.
right, and this what really pisses me off is that there's too much emphasis on clubbing you over the head. It's like Peter Griffin on Family Guy with that little clip that says it insists upon itself.
Yeah,
That
exactly. I mean, if we're going to do a fresh new take on Terminator, you scrap the nuclear war angle, and it's all about the automation. It's about how robots eventually replace people,
right, right, and
and that changes the entire terms of the conflict.
right, and here's another thing. It's like the because you mentioned the bootstrap paradox with the Terminator, because if you believe that everything that are in everything that's been posted in the Reddit leaks, and again, all the previews so far that we've seen dropped, they've been pretty much confirmed. That the leaks have been confirmed in what we've seen from the trailers and leaked footage
Yeah.
at D23 and other locations, and it's like all of it is confirming what's in these leaks so far. And what really gets me, and this is the first thing that should have been fixed immediately before, because the screenings apparently earlier this year they're probably test screenings. This is the same thing that actually screwed up Halloween 6 back in the
with
mid-90s.
test screenings with unfinished special effects, probably.
Right. It's a work print. The special effects are not finished. The editing, I mean, if you look at the DVD for Highlander Endgame, if you've seen that, my pity.
I've not seen the DVD. I saw it at the theaters.
Right. Well, the work print, the alternate edit that had unfinished effects and everything, that actually turned out to be a better movie than the DVD release, because it actually explained more. And you know how Batman versus Superman, the extended cut, actually explained stuff that should have been explained in the theater, because it wasn't the extraneous stuff that you didn't need and added nothing to the story that got cut. It was all the vital information because
Zack Snyder doesn't understand how to make a cogent movie within a reasonable time frame.
Or maybe he's actually in the editing bay and not trusting his editors. I don't know, because if you think about it, Jaws and the Terminator and the original Star Wars, those were saved in the editing bay.
Yeah.
But because we're getting kind of off track. But the whole leak.
I don't know
about John Connor being killed off. It renders the whole premise unwatchable, because
what was the whole point of the first two Terminator movies?
Right, it's like the bootstrap paradox. Skynet and John Connor cannot exist without each other. The elimination of one necessarily results in the elimination of the other. So,
but if that happens, that means then that
there shouldn't be any Terminators. Sarah Connor should have no memory of even having had a child, because that child never would have existed.
But then that means that the Terminators are an inevitable feature of the timeline, which makes the entire point about temporal causality and determinism that were central theme of the first and second movie irrelevant.
Right. And
I think it was the guys on Red
Letter.
Yeah, the guys on Red Letter Media had a point. Like, literally every sequel since the second Terminator movie has just been undermining the narrative quality of both the first and second Terminator movie by going back to the well in a stupid way.
Right. And here's where Scott Mendelson actually asks a question that is probably more prescient in spite of itself. It's is a moderate improvement over the last two Terminator movies going to be good enough, or will it pay for the sins of its mediocre predecessors and play to a disinterested movie-going populace? Because Mr. H reviews, and I don't care for him all that much, because he comes across as being a little bit too alpha guy type, and I find more often than not that tends to mask a lot of insecurity. And attacking, people he calls low T betas or something, or whatever. I wish people would stop doing that shit, because it doesn't make a good argument. But he actually did have the foresight to point out that the demographics that are being played to, it's actually shrinking. Okay, that this movie is being marketed towards people who like the first two Terminator films. Fine, I was a kid when it came out. I'm 45, but our audience is in a minority. Okay?
Right, but
who's going to go see a geriatric Arnold and Linda Hamilton?
Right, but they're also trying to add in new younger people, but with things that are not appealing to new younger people.
Exactly. So, and then of course you're basically doing a reboot of a story that's been done before and better.
And that has been given a soft reboot just a couple of years ago that's still in everybody's memory.
Right, and it gets to this point where, again, like the Cracked article from 4 years ago says, you're trying to build a franchise before you've even laid the foundation. It's like you're already writing sequels and dropping ideas for sequels before the movie's even been released. It's like, no, dude, come on, no, stop. Why are you doing a reboot in the first place? It's because your efforts at franchise building before failed, and it shows you've not learned any lessons from this. Which brings us to our next part is from we got discovered.com. It's from a month ago, but it's still kind of relevant. But a new report from a month ago shows children aren't really interested in Star Wars anymore, and that's the audience that Disney is trying to play to.
Not really. Because have you watched their children's projects? Have you watched Star Wars Resistance?
I thankfully avoided that.
It's not. It's badly animated using a bad animation style. Was set in a time slot that was not good for children. They made an anime short series for Star Wars that, if it's a kid who's interested in Star Wars and watches this, they've also watched the original movie. So they altered the original movies in ways that were kind of embarrassing, with Leia doing a lot of the female abuse of the male anime character tropes. And it's like, bruh, what are you doing?
Yeah, yeah, and considering, because Disney is reportedly cutting employee hours due to low Star Wars Galaxy's Edge attendance. Basically, they spent billions making the theme parks. Nobody's coming to them.
Well,
Part of it because they're overpriced. I mean, people are
well,
not going to
forget the overpriced part. There's not really anything to do with the parks. There's 2 rides in Galaxy's Edge. One of which is broken right now in Galaxy's Edge in California.
Yeah.
So it's 2 rides plus some shops plus some places to go get dinner and adult libations. That's not going to win you over, folks.
Right, and also the trailer being dropped for the Rise of Skywalker.
Wait, the new trailer's finally out?
Yeah, yeah, it's the one that was dropped at D23.
Well, that's not really a trailer. That's not really a trailer.
Yeah, well, it's a trailer because Jar Jar Abrams, again, he's nostalgia pushing, and it's the only thing he has to sell the movie. But Solo lost money at the box office last year. It looks like The Last Jedi is going to keep audiences away from The Rise of Skywalker because people, I mean, they're not buying it. I mean,
so first things first. Solo lost money because it got bogged down in reshoots. If they just let the original director's cut work through, they would have lost far less money.
Right, but it still would have lost money, though.
Yeah, but it would have lost like maybe a marginal amount of money, kind of money that they can make it up in DVD sales and shit like that.
Right.
Not to the extent that Solo lost money.
Right, but here's the thing, though. It does seem like it's indicative of the problems under Kathleen Kennedy's stewardship of the franchise. Again, because Bob Iger, when he had Disney buy Lucasfilm, they bought it with the intention of churning out movies like product on a factory conveyor belt. It never occurred to them that to actually look at the property that they bought and understand the nature of it.
You need a blueprint for a factory conveyor belt.
Right, and even George Lucas at his worst when he was directing the prequels, okay, when he was overindulging his wildest ideas, even he could only go so far, which is why the prequels didn't do nearly as well as the original trilogy.
So I watched an excellent documentary on why the prequels failed. Here's why the prequels failed. George was the writer, director, executive producer, and head of the studio.
Pretty much,
So George couldn't stop production so he could catch up on the writing because he had hundreds, if not thousands, of special effects artists working on the digital effects.
Right, which, considering... Because I was just reading this rather lengthy review of Jaws, where it kind of went into like how the screenplay was basically written and rewritten on set because stuff wouldn't work, so they had to do rewrites and also weather came into play. because it was supposed to be sunny and warm, and instead it was like rainy, and they had to keep delaying and all this happy horse crap. But it was rather chaotic, and but it produced something beautiful. But with George Lucas, by the time you get to the prequels, he's already got everything storyboarded down to the smallest detail, like thousands upon thousands of images, to where all he had to do was just show up, yell, action, and cut, and that was it.
He didn't even have to get out of his chair.
Right. Narratively, the trilogy didn't seem to know who it belonged to. Was it Anakin's trilogy? Was it Palpatine's? Was it Obi-Wan's? It seemed like it kept bouncing back and forth between point of view characters where, okay, you're supposed to show how Anakin fell to the dark side, but you're making him entirely too sympathetic. Okay, it's like you want to start off with someone who you can already see is on his way to being dark, but you want to show it from Obi-Wan's perspective.
Okay,
you created Qui-Gon Jinn, which I thought was an unnecessary and
so let's put a pin in this because we could talk about this for hours. I'll send you a link to the video later, and we could talk about that on another show. George's original idea was he wanted to make his original script for Star Wars into the template for the prequels. But there were all sorts of narrative problems in doing that, which led to him making certain narrative decisions that damned the whole process.
Right.
But we don't want to get too far into the weeds about the prequels. So we were going to touch on the rumor that there are multiple cuts of Rise of Skywalker floating around out there, waiting to hear what we the fans think about them. So, do you buy that rumor that's circulating around?
I would give it a lot less credence if it wasn't coming from sources like Midnight's Edge. Where because Gary at Nerdrotic, he's like Mr. H, where he tends to overindulge on the beta and cucks stuff. But with Midnight's Edge, especially with Andre, because he came rather late to Star Wars, and he's not really given to indulging in some of the hyperbole that you might see from Doomcock. As much as I like Doomcock, but again. And he tends to go into world-class bullshitters territory a lot.
Yeah. So let's propose something really shocking on our video. Rise of Skywalker is not the next Star Wars priority for Disney right now.
No, it's not.
The Mandalorian is.
Exactly.
And it's key. And it's key to their launching Disney Plus, which is something that the board of directors at Disney, all their senior management believes is the future of the company.
Right, which frankly, and we could do a whole other show on this, so and so I won't discuss it too much here. But I don't think there's anyone who's going to win the streaming wars because it's the same thing.
Well, I mean, we have Peacock now joining the list of streaming services.
Universal, NBC, right? So, but you've got the latecomers.
There was a meeting. There was a meeting where somebody said, "Let's call our streaming service Peacock," and that was determined by everybody to be the best idea.
Yeah.
That meeting actually happened.
Right. And now you've got from Los Angeles Times, which you linked to, it's like Disney wants to limit profit participation on its new TV shows.
Mm-hmm.
So, but, Disney's making a lot of rather questionable decisions here with regards to its product. Because, you're basically when they bought Lucasfilm and started this new trilogy, again, they bought it with the idea that it was going to make a ton of money for them, but now it's become priority number 2 to finish the trilogy in any meaningful or satisfying way, and now you're focusing on a streaming service for satellite franchises, like The Mandalorian, which is like, okay, but guys, shouldn't you wait and see how The Rise of Skywalker is going to affect your ability to make money off of Star Wars as a property?
But let me then propose an even further thought-provoking thought. Dave Filoni is the guy behind Clone Wars. Dave Filoni is broadly considered second only to George Lucas for understanding and creating in the Star Wars canon. He built retroactively a minor character from Return of the Jedi into one of the surviving clones from the Clone Wars throughout the whole run of the Clone Wars animated series. He's partnered up with Jon Favreau, the guy who started up the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Do you think maybe Disney has saying, JJ, just finish this off? We're going to take a couple breaks for years with movies. We're going to see if Favreau and Filoni can come up with something that'll satisfy the fans.
Right.
And then when we reboot the movies, we're going to reboot them with the tone of what we give them through Disney Plus.
Right. Which it hasn't worked out so well for CBS, has it? What makes you think it's going to work out for Disney Plus?
Well, Disney has more competent managers than CBS, for one.
Uh, Not at Lucasfilm.
Well, I don't know.
And if you believe some
That is a
accounts, not
debatable
necessarily
question.
at Marvel either, because he let Spider-Man slip through their fingers. It's like,
But
what the hell?
well, Spider-Man, that's a whole other conversation topic. But I would argue the people at Lucasfilm are not as stupid as the people at CBS, at least insofar as the Star Trek franchise is concerned. But they're basically waiting till the merger happens so they don't have to deal with J.J. Abrams and his property. So I expect if that merger goes through with Viacom, or Paramount, or however they label themselves
Right.
now.
Well, it's already a done deal. I mean, that they merged. What was it, last month?
It's done, but I don't think all the regulatory hurdles have been dotted and crossed yet.
Ah, I see.
I expect once that happens, they're going to reboot all the reboot Trek stuff, so it's back in the mainstream canon.
Well, I think that's what they're going to try and do with Picard, based on the rumors that I've been hearing. That because right now, here's the thing: Sherry Redstone has never been a fan of Les Moonves, and this whole Me Too thing that got him, which took entirely way too long, in my opinion. It's allowed for something of a cleaning of house over at CBS, because Viacom under Sherry Redstone. I mean, because technically she and her family have always held controlling interest in all the companies, but legally, CBS was allowed to operate independently from Paramount and Viacom. Now that CBS is back under the Viacom umbrella, though, I suspect that she is going to try to basically take a wrecking ball to anything that was done while Les Moonves was large in charge.
Yeah.
And that is where we might see Star Trek be resuscitated, or it might get even worse.
But I suspect the rumors of there being multiple cuts going on are leaks that are being exposed as basically marketing research for future products.
Right. And it seems to me, right, because, and one of the things that irritates me about the leaks with Star Wars is that so many of them seem unreliable, because it seems based on like drafts, like earlier drafts that might have been floated but never actually made it. And it's like, but they're trying to tease the return
but if you
of
look at what
Emperor
they've done
Palpatine.
with well, they're not teasing the return of Emperor Palpatine. It's outright stated at this point.
Yeah.
But
in
the
what
whole
way
thing
is the question, though.
Yeah. So it's like the whole thing with Marvel. Marvel does similar things with leaks to not only gauge audience reaction to ideas for the future, but also to determine what employees are leaking things inappropriately. So that's what I think is going on with the whole Star Wars leak situation. I think they're allowing J.J. Abrams to close this embarrassing chapter in Star Wars. They're allowing Dave Filoni and Favreau to start the beginning stages of a less embarrassing version of Star Wars. And then after the 3-year hiatus, they're going to come up with something nice and easy that's going to be fan pleasing. And they're going to find somebody. They're not going to try to find another auteur director. They're going to find a guy who says, listen, I want to make a continuation of George Lucas's legacy, but one that brings in the current generation into that fandom that has been connecting people who were science fiction fans when they were in their 20s and 30s in the 70s to people who are in their 20s and 30s today.
Right.
And 20s and 30s in the future.
Right. That actually brings me back to the Cracked article about 6 things Hollywood needs to do, because, it's pointing out, movies need to stop assuming they're getting sequels, because, director Josh Trank, when he was trying to prime audiences for Fan 4 Stick, He was telling a Comic Con audience that the film almost works as a prequel to the theoretical sequel, which we now know it will never have. But it's also and I'm quoting here, but it's also a perfect representation for how badly Marvel Studios' success clouds the judgment of every writer and director. Big budget movies are no longer made as single serving stories, but under the bold assumption that they are only one installment of a vast network of sequels and spin offs. And while there's nothing wrong with planning ahead a little bit, treating your film like it's the first act of a 3-act play will either take away from the story you're trying to tell, Alita Battle Angel, yeah, or become flat out embarrassing if nobody likes it and you never get to make another one, which, again, fan forced
Well,
and.
well, that's competent story crafting. You tell a single story that works as a single story, and each act in that single story works as its own independent story, and then the sequel combined with that movie is a second act in a broader story. But it all has to work. Each individual components have to be a competent story.
Right, and it turns out Genesis was
No, that was
it was
bad.
again supposed to be the first in a new trilogy, and again,
But hey, Jai Courtney cashed another paycheck.
Yeah, basically. Right, and that's actually what almost ruined Age of Ultron. But
I mean, if I see Jai Courtney in a movie, I know that there's a high risk that this movie is going to be a bad time.
probably, almost as bad a time as seeing anything that has, Daisy Ridley, because or even worse, Brie Larson, because I'm going to see someone who can't act worth a damn, acting completely pretentious and full of herself and or himself, depending on if it's.
By the way, did you watch The Unicorn Store?
I have gone out of my way to avoid that.
Oh no, you should watch it. It is definitely a so bad it's good movie in the sense that it is utterly racist, and I doubt that Brie Larson understands how racist the movie is. It has not only one, but two magic Negroes in the movie.
Oh Lord.
One of which becomes the boyfriend of Brie Larson's character. And
Does no one remember Song of the South?
Wait. It gets better. It gets better. And she also shows racism towards South Asian characters. And her parents are youth group advisors for troubled inner city youth. And she makes her unicorn problems be more important by the way she's going on about them than actual inner city kids with real problems.
Oh,
the total tone deafness of the movie is beautiful. Also, the only woman who doesn't embrace her imagination in the movie is an East Asian businesswoman who's in a boardroom scene who doesn't believe in imagination, apparently, the way they kind of have her acting in the movie. It's like, it's clear as you're watching this, she doesn't realize how racist this was.
Oh, Lord.
She's completely genuine in thinking this is normal. And the movie opens up her doing a test in an art school where she has to do a character portrait. Now, you've been to an art school program, though not a full art school. It was the film school.
Right.
So you have a project that you have to do as a test. You're given specific instructions to do it. Well, she doesn't color inside the lines. She, in fact, colors in her painting and the whole wall in her painting of herself as a unicorn. So, of course, she fails the assignment and fails out of art school. But if you got into art school, you had to do very specific artistic things to a very specific regimen to pass. So I don't know if Brie Larson ever went to acting school, but this movie was written by somebody who doesn't understand how art school works, or is trying to take advantage of the fact the audience doesn't know how art school works.
Right.
So it is a beautiful train wreck. Now, on the flip side, if you want to watch something that is a terrible movie, but it's great to watch to understand why it's terrible, there's The Fanatic with John Travolta that came out recently, directed and written and partially produced by Fred Durst of Limp Bizkit fame.
It insists upon itself.
And it was the first movie that Fred Durst ever wrote. And his co-writer was some stunt guy who's also never written a movie before.
Oh, Lord.
And there were terrible decisions throughout the whole movie.
Mistakes
None
were
being
made, and the
none being
responsibility rests with Brie Larson and with
no, Fred Durst.
and Fred
None, none,
Durst and
none,
John
none being
Travolta.
none being better than Fred Durst directing a scene where the character goes, "Oh yeah, let's play some Limp Bizkit." That's an actual scene in the movie.
Have you seen the movie Crowley? With that was written by Iron Maiden's Bruce Dickinson,
Yeah,
uh, and it was basically sold as an excuse to sell Iron Maiden albums because it's basically one big. But right, that's kind of what comes to mind when I hear about this movie, because like
yeah.
Fred Durst writing a movie is like Bruce Dickinson and
But
Iron Maiden
but
financing a
but
movie
the
where,
but the other thing about the Unicorn Store, which baffles me, is Samuel L. Jackson chose to play a magical Negro in that movie.
well, he probably was like, okay, yeah, they probably just tempted him with a huge paycheck for it. There's
Well,
probably
no,
like
no, 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 no,
90% of the movie's budget is his paycheck.
no, no. According to Brie Larson, she was showing him the script because she'd got this after her Oscar on like a pile of scripts of what would be her debut movie. And Samuel L. Jackson said, "No, I'm playing the salesman at the Unicorn Store."
Oh, Lord. See,
So
this is why Disney needs to bring Song of the South back and all of its other racist cartoons back out, like
I
Warner
mean,
Brothers did, and put at that
yeah, and just
addendum
put
at the
that
beginning that
disclaimer.
says, yeah,
Just put that disclaimer.
right, put the disclaimer that says, okay, the views and racism here is not what we feel today, but we wanted to make you
but
understand why this is wrong. So
but
we're not
while
going to edit it out or archive it for you. Because if you
but
bring stuff like Song of the South and some of the other racist cartoons that Disney has produced over the decades back out, then people will remember why it's racist and why it's wrong and why you shouldn't be doing movies like
yeah,
Unicorn Store.
but also with Song of the South, if you contextualize the original story, it was actually for the late 19th century, early 20th century. It was relatively progressive because it was all about a young white boy befriending a former slave who was affiliated with his family, probably one of their former slaves.
Right.
So there is a positive racial element in there, but just in context of today's context, it seems a lot more racist because it kind of is.
Well, yeah, but you know, it was definitely a product of its time. But but yeah, it just seems to me like, you know, the same kind of mentalities. Because, you know, this is another reason why I think these franchises are in deep trouble, is that both the Terminator and Star Wars are being made with an eye toward pandering to certain demographics, like women, like non-whites, in a way that doesn't actually respect
Do you
their
know? Do you
intelligence.
know a big reason why Star Wars is pandering, in my opinion, to non-whites or to non-whites and to women as their primary targeting strategy?
Um, I'm going to let you explain that because I think,
So, so the last successful Disney princess movie was Frozen.
right,
Before that, arguably Moana. I don't really think we should consider Moana a Disney princess movie, but before that, there was a big dearth in the Disney princess line. So the Disney princess brand was Disney's hook young girls in, keep them hooked in until they're adults.
right,
They lost the script on the Disney princess plan. So their original strategy for Star Wars, for Marvel, was to replicate that process but for young boys. So they lost the script on the Disney princesses, so they had to pivot over into Star Wars and over into Marvel to make that strategy continue to work to diversify their potential audiences.
right. And again, this goes back to the cracked article that says the best movies knew exactly who they were made for.
Yep.
And they use the example of Mad Max, where you know, anyone who wouldn't like the film didn't go to see it in the first place, so it actually did pretty well with its target audience, but it also knew who its target audience was. With Disney and Terminator and, to a degree, Marvel, they don't know who their target audience is.
Eh,
All
I
right.
mean, let's give another example.
STD is marketed to people who don't like Star Trek and wouldn't watch Star Trek if they had a choice in the matter. So obviously, people are not going to want to watch it because it's got the name Star Trek attached to it. But you're making it for people who aren't going to see it anyway. So why even bother?
And basically, if you're gonna make Star Trek, there's a thing the Star Trek audience wants, but since you were trying to maximize your profit on the J.J. Abrams license deal and minimize your cost, you kind of end up in this screwed up position.
Right. Right.
Uh,
And quoting from the article again, it's like, oh, hello again. Terminator is a franchise that no one under the age of 17, let me restate that. No one under the age of 17 gives a wheezing duck fart about.
I mean, the Terminator as a concept is
Right.
cool
I
in the
mean,
same way that Frankenstein's monster is cool.
right. I mean,
But we saw.
Schwarzenegger hasn't made a memorable movie in 20 years, which
Well,
is
that's not true. That's not true. He hasn't made a good, memorable movie in 20 years. He's
right.
made several terrible,
Memorable for how
memorable
bad
movies.
they are. You're right. But okay, so yeah, a little bit of an addendum here. But but it's basically about how long it's been since there was a good Terminator film. Genesis, their best possible hope to succeed would have been to appeal to the fans who grew up with the series, but
Mm.
instead of embracing that because it's R-rated, the original is R-rated. I'm not so sure
Mhm.
about the Judgment Day. I think that was PG-13. But again, it still maintained an appeal to the audience who saw the first one. With this, again, they opted for PG-13. It's like Terminator and Star Wars and other niche properties. It's like they're trying to be all things. They're like the Democrats, just to bring politics into it. They're trying to be all things to all people, but again, by trying to appeal to everyone, they're appealing to nobody, and that's the
It,
problem.
the story is not thought out. It's not starting with the story first and saying, is this a compelling story?
Right,
So, like, at its core, what Terminator's about is, are we going to destroy ourselves?
right, and
Are
even the
machines going to
opening.
replace us?
Right, and if you believe the leaks, and again, all the trailers and dropped footage that we've seen so far have pretty much 100% confirmed what was in the leaks from earlier this summer. That the central opening scene where John Connor is killed off pretty much obliterates any chance of people being able to get into this reboot of the movie because
Yeah.
it's like, okay, remember the Back to the Future franchise?
Hmm.
Okay, like the original film. Okay, like because the sequels were filmed back to back. All right, because they were going to do a sequel, then they realized, oh, we want to make a trilogy, but we're going to film them back to back because we have a story we want to tell and get wrapped up, and then move on to the next Robert Zemeckis project. So, but the original film, okay, it actually handled paradoxes. In fact, actually, the entire trilogy handled paradoxes like this a lot
It's
better
it's definitely in
because
the top third of time travel movies for how it handles the narrative and storytelling problems of time travel.
right because the first film we saw one possible solution to the paradox of going back in time and preventing your own parents or grandparents from meeting and falling in love is that Marty and his siblings, in fact, his entire timeline was slowly being erased as a new timeline asserted itself. Okay, and you're given this sheet where, okay, you assume well, the obvious solution, well, the trip through time itself is negated, and Marty doesn't even go back in time.
Yeah.
So, but then you would have no movie. So you have to have this thing where as a new timeline is asserting itself, the old one is being erased, and Marty is starting, and his siblings start to fade out of existence. Well, that's something that actually was also handled in RoboCop versus the Terminator to a degree, which is this
Comic
trilogy of
book.
comic book. Right, it was a comic book trilogy uh, written by Frank Miller back before his writing turned to shit. Um, but
Actually, Frank's biggest problem with his writing right now is that, in my opinion, I read his new Superman series. I actually kind of like what he's doing, but Frank thinks he's beyond being edited
right,
at this point in his career. And there's nobody who could just sit down and say, listen, Frank, I know you've done some of the most brilliant things in comic books by breaking all the rules, but, you know, you're also have been around long enough to understand why the rules are there in the first place and how to use the rules effectively. I'm just going to tell you this is going to work out better if you structure it a little bit better.
right, and also I think Frank Miller's problem is he doesn't know whether he wants to be anti or pro fascist.
It's
Because
complicated.
right, because
Well,
half the time he's like defending He's creating characters like in The Dark Knight Returns, where like the Joker's psychiatrist, it paints him as this bleeding heart liberal, and no one in psychiatry is actually really like that.
Yeah, but we'll get back to that maybe another time, because the Superman series he's doing is actually fascinating. The way he's narratively structuring it, he just needed somebody to tell him, we need to edit this story, focus it up a little bit. You have all the elements in the story for success, just they need to be structured better.
Kind of like with George Lucas.
Kind of like with George Lucas.
Bringing us full circle back to the Star Wars discussion. Because, again, and also, it's like George Lucas, Stephen Moffat, Frank Miller, these are writers and storytellers who desperately need people slapping their hands away from the keyboard whenever they get an idea that that they're to take the entire thing off the rails. And it seems to me like that's happening with these two franchises. Is that they're going completely off the rails? That they've lost focus.
I think for Star Wars, what's going to happen is Disney's going to reboot it, use the TV series as the template. Once they have a couple years of TV in the can to give them a good idea, that's going to be what they're going to roll into production with.
Right, but will that really happen if The Rise of Skywalker tanks like Solo did? Because if you think about it,
I think it would be impossible for it to tank like Solo did. I think it'll underperform. I think it will be lower than The Last Jedi in box office performance, because in the first 3 Star Wars movies there was a drop. The exception being Empire was like more successful, I think, than A New Hope in total box office.
Right,
but
although at the time it did get its share of ridicule at the time. I mean, the appreciation deepened over the years, but
we're talking about money, because this is a dollars and cents question.
Right.
There was a drop off from The Phantom Menace all the way down to Revenge of the Sith. Revenge of the Sith made the least amount of money of the prequel movies.
Right, and that again is because George Lucas needs someone to slap his hand away from everything and say, "Look, take a step back."
Well, here's the thing. At that point,
he's
in
killed
the prequels,
younglings. I mean, come on, when you've got dialogue like that, where Ewan McGregor, you can actually see him up on the screen saying those words and knowing how awful they are.
Well, there's several
and still
problems.
having to say it, and he cannot mask his unease with having to say those words.
So Anakin killing the children was added because George didn't feel Anakin had done enough to become Darth Vader. My response to that, of course, is, did you watch the genocide he committed in the previous movie?
Right.
Did you kind of missed your script a little bit there, but the Attack of the Clones was basically, they wrote the script day to day. So basically George wrote the shooting script for the day, and that's what they shot.
Yeah.
That's why that movie was such a mess. And when he wrote the script for Revenge of the Sith, he was told, listen, George, you wrote these other 2 movies for directors with skill sets you don't have. Write Revenge of the Sith for the skill set you have as a director.
Right, but he can't write dialogue to save his life. I'm pretty sure Ian McDiarmid, when he had that scene with Hayden Christensen in the opera, and he's relating the story of Darth Plagueis, who it turns out was Palpatine's teacher. I'm pretty sure he ad-libbed most of that, or might have actually written his own dialogue, because he actually delivered that line. It's kind of like with the Empire Strikes Back, where the scene in the swamp where Yoda is basically schooling Luke on why his lack of belief in the Force is preventing him from progressing any further with his training. And that dialogue, is actually very good. And it's all the good dialogue is saved for those like 1 or 2 key scenes, and everything else, it's like they're struggling to either not bust out laughing or to not groan in open disbelief that they're actually saying these words.
But Ian McDiarmid's a great actor, and his acting as Palpatine is why I feel he's a great actor, because he was given an ultimate ham role and he just played it up. Like whichever Skarsgård brother played Pennywise the Clown, I forgot which one it is. Bill did a great job as Pennywise the Clown, but Tim Curry did a better job because Tim Curry understood, you're a child-eating clown monster. This is your opportunity to ham up an acting performance like nobody's ever hammed up an acting performance before.
And play to it. I mean, that's, but right now, And again, this is why I think having a geriatric Arnold Schwarzenegger come back, one more time. I mean, is he going to be coming back at age 85 to
Well,
do another Terminator movie? Because
he's actually trying to get either a King Conan TV series or movie off the ground,
right, which again,
which
is there even an
maybe
audience for it anymore?
there's an audience for Conan. The problem is that they keep butchering Conan, which is why Marvel has signed a expanded deal with Robert E. Howard Properties. So we could very easily see a Conan series on Disney Plus. And the idea Arnold had was, a framing device series where he's King Conan in his later years, reflecting on untold stories of Conan's past that reflect to events within the framing device plot that he has to deal with.
Right, right. But instead we're getting him as a geriatric Terminator, which I can understand. Okay, yeah, the flesh ages because it's actual flesh
Well, I
growing
mean,
for the cyborgs, but
how much did
there's
you think they
only
paid him for that? I mean, Arnold's got like some alimony he has to pay, I think.
yeah,
Some
which
child support issues from his illegitimate kid.
right. Well, the kid's over 21, so I don't think he's going to have to pay for child support because they're all adults now. But yeah, there is the alimony thing. There is the fact that he has to basically pay the penalty for his past transgressions, not just with the affair and having a child out of wedlock, but his term as governor of
And
California,
also
which wasn't
and
all that
also
great. His
let's face it, in
his
the current Me Too climate, I'm sure he has a lawyer on standby to offer a payoff in case anybody shows up who says Arnold got a little too grabby at some party.
right. Well, he kind of did that already when he was running for governor because that's actually something that came up on the campaign trail was like his tendency to be the groping for but but again he's but he's also the type of guy who never takes any real responsibility. I mean, this is a guy who actually hid having open heart surgery from his wife and kids, almost died on the operating table, and then they find out after the fact. It's like, at what point were you planning on telling us, Arnie? Because if you died on the table, you know, how do you think we would have felt if we'd found out that way?
That was a big mistake on his part.
And then he doesn't even consult his wife when he decides to run for governor. It's like, so there's a lot of baggage, much like the baggage with Edward Furlong, because he's got a history of domestic abuse where, he's,
And I think if I remember, he's had some narcotic issues too.
yeah, drug and alcohol addiction. He's also, in fact, actually, I did a video earlier this summer about some of the issues bringing Edward Furlong back because I've actually seen a screenshot on one of Mr. H's videos, I think, where he links to this article
Allegedly,
showing,
him from the movie. Yeah, I've seen that one too.
right, showing the body double for Edward Furlong with the similar hairstyle to John Connor from T2 and then Arnold's body double, which, and again, this kind of reinforces the leaks from earlier in the summer that says, oh, yeah. But because we are getting to the hour-long mark, and I kind of wind this rambling discussion up a little bit. But I actually kind of want to come to the Sean Carlin piece that I sent you a link to, where he's talking about the nostalgia baiting for the '90s now, as opposed to just the '80s. But and I think part of this is a little bit too hostile towards our generation, Generation X, because I don't think it's necessarily that so much as corporate Hollywood is opposed to doing anything original because that would entail a higher degree of risk that they just keep returning to the well and trying to exploit stuff that's already been done before and better.
Yeah. I mean, like, for example, Luke is like our parents' age, right? It's like the grandparents' age for the millennials. So those kids who have grown up multiple generations watching the original Star Wars product, you can nostalgia mine that by playing on that very clear foster relative role that kind of a character plays. So the problem is they don't want to put in the work.
Right.
they don't want to put in the work to develop a property properly.
No, they don't. It's like because and again, this goes to some of the problems that I think not just Terminator and Alita and obviously STD and all this other stuff in DC extended universe has been some of the worst. But again, they're doing this thing where, like you pointed out, they don't want to put in the work to actually build it. If you think about the formula for Marvel Studios, Kevin Feige started off doing these standalone movies that told their own self-contained stories, and you only
but alluded to the fact that they were in a broader universe. Didn't go into the broader universe, just alluded to it being there.
Right, and so they're, the other studios are trying to play catch up and say, but they're only looking at it this in the most superficial manner.
And I think Marvel Studios is probably going to be having a rough patch with their next sequence of movies.
Right, the Phase 4 movies, right? Which to me, they've pretty much. And again, I tend to blame Disney more than Sony.
Well,
losing Spider-Man for reasons I pointed out in my last video. But to me, it's like Disney got a little bit too greedy in terms of trying to hold on to Spider-Man, but Sony also decided.
Here's the thing. These negotiations were about an early extension of the contract. So what happens in a business when you don't early extend your contract? You extend it at the end of the contract. There's 2 more movies at play. Sony can't get Tom Holland off the ground with the Uncharted video game movie series that they're wanting to do. So at the end of this sequence of movies, if Tom Holland's not happy with what Sony's doing with the Spider-Man property, he bounces. And as I understand the license that Sony has, and that's an asterisk here, I may be wrong, but as I understand their license, they have a license to make Peter Parker Spider-Man movies. They don't have a license to make broad Spider-Man live-action movies. They were given a license to bring more of those things into animated movies,
right,
and they don't have the license to bring them into television. So if they, at the end of these next 2 movies that Tom Holland is contractually obligated to do, they lose Tom Holland, they have to reboot the whole Spider-Man sequence.
Right, which frankly...
At that,
right,
wait, but
really...
wait. It gets worse for Sony, because also at the end of that chain of events, Sony may get bought out by Apple to feed their Apple Plus service. So if that happens, they lose Spider-Man anyway. All their Spider-Man rights revert back to Marvel.
Right. Which
so does Disney make a deal for an early extension with a company that may soon cease to exist and they don't need to worry about it? When they have to get Eternals off the ground to set up the Celestial Host and some of the cosmic Marvel threats, Shang-Chi off the ground to try to do what they've done successfully with Black Panther and Captain Marvel, but with Asian fans. Combine the Disney Plus streaming service of their shows with the movies, and also use the Disney streaming service to introduce the Young Avengers to make the Young Avengers the next TV series. They also have X-Men movies to integrate into the fold. They also have Fantastic Four movies to enter in the fold. Fantastic Four is going to be a slightly higher priority because that brings Silver Surfer and Galactus along with it. So Marvel can wait to bring Spider-Man back. Sony can't wait. Sony needs to keep going with Tom Holland. They need to get an animated TV stream off the ground if Sony's going to even still be Sony.
Right.
So that's...
this may be a similar deal to the Fox deal, where Sony of Japan still remains independent, but sells off its entertainment wing to Apple.
Exactly. That could be what happens, in which that case, Marvel gets Spider-Man back, and they don't have to worry. Also, to keep in mind, Morbius is going up against a Disney movie. That's the next at-bat for the Sony Spider-Verse.
Yeah, because when Disney released its schedule, for what was it, the next 5 years or whatever, basically that was a challenge to any other studio that's thinking of trying to compete with Disney. Yeah, we dare you to try and compete with us.
Also, this movie
we don't have Spider-Man anymore?
No. So this movie also stars Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. So it's a Disney movie based on a popular Disney theme park ride starring The Rock. versus Morbius, which is one of the more esoteric side characters from the Spider-Man setting. Morbius isn't going to beat The Rock at the box office.
Well, if you're going to bring
That's not,
logic into it,
so Sony loses in that. They think Apple's going to buy them. If Sony wants to stay independent, if Sony local management wants to stay independent, then they may be going back to the deal with Disney and willing to take a deal. And then Sony of Japan says, well, we got all this side Marvel money coming in, we can't sell the company. So it really is going to depend on that broader set of, wargaming.
right? And
Then you have Venom coming up, which is going to be the first shot for Tom Holland within the Sony Spider-Verse. And Disney can move another movie within shooting distance of Venom. If there's still if it becomes a hostile situation between Sony and Disney.
right.
If that's how Disney wants to play it out. And if, Disney completely nukes their ability to work without them, Sony can crawl back.
Right. Well,
and the
right
way
now,
it's publicly presented is it's all amicable. So if they happen, they say, well, we just realized that this movie would do better this opening weekend than this other movie. So it'll never be accused of Disney basically torpedoing Sony back to the negotiating table. But that's totally in the cards. Or Marvel realistically can wait out 5 years, maybe 6 years, and Sony may get sold to Apple, and all those Spider-Man rights land back at home.
Right. Which, again, I don't think Sony is going to be that stupid where they're going to let their one big money-making franchise slip through their fingers, which is why I think they kind of decided, okay, well, we want to do our own thing right now. So now we're going to say no to this deal. Oh, wait, now you're making a worse deal? Who taught you how to negotiate?
Well, the deal wasn't actually worse for Sony. So Sony was getting the opportunity to get streaming service money right away with TV deals. Marvel was wanting to distribute all their Spider-Verse TV stuff.
But here's the thing, though. It's like, and I don't know if you listen to John Campea or not, but he had Robert Meyer Burnett on to discuss this, and they were talking, and Burnett actually kind of put it into perspective. Right now, Spider-Man is Sony's big moneymaker on the big screen.
It's their only moneymaker.
Right. So they're not going to want to cede creative control over to another entity, whether it's Disney or another studio. They're not going to want to cede that control. What Disney was asking in that deal-breaking offer, they wanted to split cost 50%, but they also wanted 50% of the box office as opposed to the 5%.
Here was
and also, they still would have kept all the merchandising rights, which is a real moneymaker, and then the rights to the TV and stuff. And it's like, okay, but that's kind of like, no, I'm sorry, but that's worse than what you offered us 6 months ago, and we told you back then. So why would we?
They were offering at one point. They were offering the animated TV rights that Sony needs. They're actually producing shows for TV that they don't have rights to.
I see.
So it actually would have made Sony more money, but the problem is their last quarter, Sony only made a couple $1 million. Sony is barely profitable. So Sony of Japan may just make the decision to say, we're pulling the plug. Or they may make a decision saying, we're going to consolidate all of our entertainment enterprises under one thing, and we're going to spin off the movie production stuff because that's not really a profit maker for us. Television makes more money, in which case, if that happens, everything goes back to Marvel.
Right, which has me thinking, what is Tom Rothman thinking?
I don't know what Tom Rothman would be thinking in this situation, because it comes down to, is Tom Rothman trying to keep Sony profitable enough that when Apple comes in for the money, that it makes a better bonus for him?
Right. And this kind of gets me thinking, though, because if Disney's going to be trying to play the long game, I mean, did they learn nothing from Godzilla King of the Monsters?
Yeah. But
because
playing the long
here's
game...
a franchise that took 5 years to get to the screen for a sequel at a time when Disney's pumping out like 2 or 3 sequels.
Well, technically King Kong was the prequel to that movie.
Right.
But nobody sees it that way.
Right.
Nobody sees it that way.
Exactly. So, but by contrast, how many Marvel Cinematic universe movies came out this year alone.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So
Absolutely.
so Disney deciding, oh, we're gonna do a Legendary Pictures uh, deal here, where we're gonna wait Sony out for 5 years while people lose interest in Spider-Man on the big screen. Could that come back and bite them in the ass?
I mean, ultimately, I'm a big Spider-Man fan. Spider-Man was one of my favorite, probably my favorite Marvel character.
Mine too, which is why I despised Maximum Clonage. Oh my god.
Yes. But realistically, from Marvel Studios' perspectives, they have more characters than they know what to do with.
Right.
So
Right.
realistically,
Hence the House of M storyline, where you reduce the number of mutants and continuity to
yeah,
a manageable level. Where,
yeah.
but
So
the way they handled
from
it was just awful.
yeah, but so from their perspective, it would suck. Tom Holland's a very likable, charismatic actor. But if, by the time that he's done with his two contractually obligated movies from Sony, which would be like 3, 4 years from now, if Sony's being sold and the rights revert back to Marvel, they say, hey, Tom, we're doing this Young Avengers movie. We're having a whole bunch of new characters that got introduced in the streaming service into an Avengers team. We want Spider-Man to be the tent pole of that team. Boom, huge announcement, goes to the roof.
All right. If only we could get something for Terminator and Star Wars.
Well, I mean, for Terminator, the answer is obvious. You have to break out of the fundamental molds of the original Terminator story. You can't continue that story because Terminator 2 closed the door on that story.
Yeah, pretty
That
effectively.
it closed the door on that story perfectly. So that's why I keep going back to it,
And if it takes
because
you
I'm not.
28 years to do a sequel to Terminator 2 and it turns out to be a shallow reboot of the first two films,
Yeah.
because if you actually look at the trailers, like the initial trailers that dropped for Terminator Dark Fate, I kept having flashbacks to T2. Like
Yeah.
where the truck is bursting through the concrete wall, and then you've got the liquid metal
To you know to
thing.
to
Right,
quote Red Letter Media, I clapped because I saw something I know.
right.
That that's a sign of lazy script. But you know, Sarah Connor Chronicles, it's all about a giant chess game between Skynet and John Connor going through multiple different timelines.
And there are other
And
players on the board too, not just Skynet. So, because
right,
there was another Terminator, was it Hunters and Killers? I think it was called, in the comics, where the Russian counterpart to Skynet was
yes,
trying to
yes,
break free of its parents' control, because Skynet basically gave Mir, which is the Russian counterpart to Skynet, sentience, but installed a failsafe so that it could take away that sentience at any time. And so Mir, it creates these crypto terminators that they're more fragile than regular ones, and there's a problem where uh, they succeed much better as infiltration units because they're designed to pass for human in a way that they even replicate the memories of the people who are being
yeah.
copied, instead of
So
just relying on generic factory churned out copies that are all similar height and build and whatever, because that's how they're designed.
and
Now you have ones who,
if you want to do a new Terminator movie, you do something like that. You tie it into the fear of automation that's coming up. You move it away from a fear of war. You have Skynet be what happens when Amazon and Google and Facebook's algorithms all get together and have a baby. And
right.
that baby becomes Skynet. And you have it controlling all the politicians through fake news and stuff like that. And Judgment Day becomes the point in time in which the people try to rise up against Skynet. It manipulates its political pawns, launches nuclear weapons. That becomes it's not the same Terminator story anymore at that point. You've altered the fundamental DNA.
Right,
And
and that's actually something that you could have told as a backstory to the original Terminator, if you think about it, because
right.
because what I always saw, because what I always thought I would do if I ever got my hands on the rights to direct a Terminator reboot trilogy, I would probably do kind of like Gus Van Sant did with Psycho, and do a more or less shot for shot remake of the first one, but then the
Mhm.
sequel would then segue into the future war, showing the rise of John Connor
Yeah.
much like in Salvation, but instead of the story that was actually told, because that was horrible, uh, you show the enslavement of humanity to build the machines that are used later on to destroy it.
Yeah.
And just when they're we've given up and are ready to go into extinction, along comes Connor, gets some inspiring victories, and kind of lights the fire back under their asses. That's how he manages
Or
to save.
or if you do another Terminator movie, you do a Terminator movie from the perspective of Judgment Day stopped, all the events were done, everything got retconned. So you go back to the original point in time where Skynet was first created and John Connor was like a programmer. And it starts you view like a super duper prequel before any of the time travel shenanigans start. That could have also been something interesting to do with it. Now it would be a fundamentally different movie series, but that's kind of like a cover band version of a Terminator movie, basically. If
Right.
you're wanting to do it that way, in Star Wars, I've talked to somebody who actually has an inside perspective on Lucasfilm, and there's a lot of corporate doublespeak that goes on in Lucasfilm and Disney, but there are boatloads of ideas you could do with Star Wars. They screwed the pooch on the sequel trilogy.
Right.
Um, I don't think they realized that until Carrie Fisher actually died, but they screwed the pooch on the sequel trilogy.
Right.
They need
And again, something that what they could have done was pass the torch, because if you remember in the extended universe novelizations and comics,
Mhm.
where you've got like the new Jedi Order and Luke's Academy and all, Mara Jade and all that, uh, they have this like Yuzon Vong war where you've got these extra
Yeah.
galactic aliens who come in with these living rock ships, and you could have done a trilogy based on that. But instead,
Yeah.
they decided, oh, we're going to try and undo Return of the Jedi because we thought it should have gone on after that, and you can't do that if the Empire is defeated. So we're going to do Empire 2.0. But, again, it's bereft of everything that made the original trilogy watchable because you're only doing things superficially.
But what you needed to do is you needed to have the last ride of Luke, Leia, Han, Lando, and Chewie. One last glorious ride. They go out as heroes of the galaxy, and then you have the new heroes get the torch past them, and that's the thing that's really the tragedy of the new movies.
Right, because you could have
Rey
had.
could have been a heroic character.
Right,
Finn was started out as an interesting heroic character.
right.
Poe
But then
Dameron
Ruin
has a
Johnson comes
potential.
along. Right,
Yeah. Like, how are you going to get 2 films worth of character development in an episode 9? You're not going to do that.
right,
You,
exactly. And here's what really pisses me off is because the potential was there. And in fact, I would have said if you're going to do a soft reboot of the original trilogy, what you could do is like, all right, you've got like the new Galactic Republic. Well, it's not all that new anymore because it's 30 years old, but you could have had it where Snoke is either a disciple of Palpatine or maybe he's from the nearly extinct Sith species, but he's trying to bring back the Empire, the evil
oh,
Empire.
there are
And
so
then
many
he
better
kind of
fan
rises
fiction
like
ideas.
Palpatine. He seduces Ben Solo. Rey is basically the fuck up student who's like still training, and she's like the only one left alive when Ben Solo turns. So that's how she ends up getting the torch passed to her, not because she's worthy, but because she's the only one surviving it. And you could actually do that to where it's like, okay, so you're seeing someone who's not even really very good, but she has to get good
Mhm.
in order
So
just to survive and carry on the fight because the
so
others are too
let me
old
give
to.
you another interesting
Right.
element that could have been done. So Finn, how he always joked about he was the janitor. And I thought about, wouldn't that have been interesting if he was a character like Garrick or Shepard Book, who said he was a janitor, but he wasn't really a janitor. He was
Right.
like a black op agent who, got burned out, and that was part of what led to that moment in The Force Awakens where he just snapped and said, "No, I'm done. I'm out."
Right.
And then, the second movie is him coming to terms with what he did and how to move past that and be a force for good in the universe. And then, the third movie is him achieving on that. I mean,
Right.
it's not hard to come up with a better fanfic version of what these stories did.
Right. In fact, actually, it's interesting you mentioned better fanfic because I've actually read fan fiction that's actually better than anything Rue and Johnson wrote, and it's actually
Well,
it was actually a
allegedly,
fan fiction follow up to the season 5 cliffhanger episode from Highlander the series, which is called Archangel. And then the fanfic was called Archangel Redeemed. And it was actually a lot better than the
yes.
season 6 opening episodes that tried to resolve that whole plot line and failed
Yeah.
spectacularly. Because it
And
made Mythos a former champion who actually lost the last round, and so and then Duncan's the new champion because he's and then he finds a way to resolve it, and Mythos is kind of redeemed too.
yeah, there are so many interesting ways to do that. That just those are roads that don't end up being taken. Do you want to end on the Pete Buttigieg thing that we could talk about it for a little bit, or do you want to save that for later?
Let's save that for later because I actually have to go feed the dog right now. It's almost
And
6 o'clock here. What?
it's getting close to dinner time, and I got another stream I'm going to be doing like around 8 o'clock, where I'm going to be doing sort of like a soft teaser launch for my comic book idea that I've told you a little bit about, and I think I showed you one of the earlier scripts.
Yeah, and that's actually something that we can do next time is talk about your comic book because being sci-fi and comic book nerds, I think it's high time at least one of us actually started doing that instead of just talking about it. So
Yeah, and I've been slowly pushing out some character design work, and I haven't sat down with my artist and come up with a formal brass tacks of here's how we're going to make the money work out.
yeah,
He says he's going to work with me because he's a guy with 20+ year professional experience, and one of his first gigs was working on Wildcats with Alan Moore.
Oh, okay.
So like that was something he and I talked about a little bit. Like wow, that's a weird little chain of events in your life now.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I want to hear all about that, but like I said, I got to go. But before we do, just recommendation to go over to Shadowversity, where he talks about redesigning the He-Man sword from Masters of the Universe.
Oh yeah,
because your comic book, it's like sword and sorcery type thing. One thing that always kind of gets me, and I'm kind of a stickler for this, is like clothing and weapon designs in comic books and movies. They're very impractical. They look good, but you would never see them in reality. And so I was thinking, what if you had a design that actually was both practical and looked decent?
Oh, I actually picked a specific sword from pre-Roman history, but we'll talk more about that later. And it's great to be back. Hopefully our time schedules are able to link up again sooner.
Yeah. So if you like what you've heard and you want to hear more, hit the subscribe button and the bell icon to receive notifications whenever we upload new content. And if you want to help support the channel, keep the lights on, help us bring you more content. I can't talk right now. Head over to our Patreon or Subscribe page. We can't do this without you. Until next time, this is Michael Wilk and Larry Bernard for the Wilk Report saying take care, good night, we're out of here.
Woo!